Hello, everyone. I would like to thank Dr. Kathy Hayes and Reverend Eric Lyles for the invitation to share on the topic of Christianity and the faith of my neighbors, and especially you for being here and listening. I will speak from my experience and perspective as the International Program Director of the Museum of World Religions, which is based in Taiwan, as the US representative of the Jerusalem-based Elijah Interfaith Institute, and as a board member of the Dallas-based Faith Commons organization. I'm also a Zen teacher here at the Maria Cannon Zen Center in Dallas and a member of Holy Trinity Catholic Church on Oak Lawn, where I'm also a volunteer at the St. Vincent Society, which helps people in need of financial assistance to keep a roof over their head and food on their table. As you can perhaps guess from my accent, I'm German. My husband, Ruben Habito, is born in the Philippines and teaches at Perkins School of Theology, which is the reason why we moved to Dallas from Japan 30 years ago. He also gave a talk in the series, which you might have heard some weeks ago. We have two adult sons, Florian and Benjamin, who live in Austin. Before Corona, I would typically travel to Taiwan, Germany, Israel, and Myanmar for work and family reasons every year, and then with many other trips to other places as well, depending on where we would hold or attend an interfaith conference. And in some years, we would also spend Christmas with our family in the Philippines. So you can see I'm a so-called global citizen, a citizen of the globalized world, in which there seem to be no more boundaries of countries, of people, or distance, or even time. There has been no travel, no international travel, of course, in the Corona year. But even then, interfaith work has continued and continues via Zoom, no matter whether the meetings are held here in Dallas itself with Faith Commons or organized on a more global level, like, for example, the G20 Interfaith Forum in October of last year, which was attended by participants from more than 80 countries and beamed from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. But at this point, let me first tell you how I myself got involved with interfaith work, and then what I have learned from it that I might want to share with you. The trajectory of my entire life actually started before my birth. It started with an act of hospitality. At the time, in 1957, my parents lived in Cologne, Germany, Köln in German. One day, my mother, who was pregnant with her first child, my brother Norbert, received a phone call from her parish priest asking her for help. As it turned out, two priests, one Spanish, the other Chinese, had visited him together and then fallen ill with the flu. The problem was they didn't speak a word of German, only Latin. "Don't you know Latin well?" the priest asked my mother. "Is there any way you could help me with taking care of them?" My mother immediately said yes. And as the story goes, when my father came back from work that night, there were two sick priests sleeping in a marital bed, Father Juan and Father Juan. This, of course, was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. And it so happened that in the year that I graduated from high school in 1978, the brother of Father Wang, who himself was also a priest, serving a parish of indigenous people in Taiwan, had invited my mother and aunt for a 3-week trip to Taiwan. It's time for you to see the world, my parents decided, and so I joined the trip to Taiwan. At the time, flying to Hong Kong via Moscow on an Aeroflot machine, with almost everyone on board smoking and drinking vodka, or so it seemed to me. So my first exposure to the wider world was not for the faint-hearted. And Taiwan, of course, was a complete culture shock to me. Everything was so different. That humid and hot climate, the densely clouded streets and night markets, the food, the colorful Buddhist and Taoist temples with their arched roofs, those countless deities and saints with sometimes black or red or green faces that I had no idea what they might represent. And then there was also the cacophony of drums, of flutes and cymbals and other instruments that were blaring through loudspeakers during Taoist funeral processions that passed through town almost everywhere. Having grown up Catholic in a small town on the French border, where I basically never even saw people looking different from myself, I was so overwhelmed by all of these impressions that it was initially even difficult to get to sleep at night. But as the days passed, I fell in love with the Chinese language. And of course, the wonderful people in Taiwan, their great hospitality and friendliness. So one day, Father Wang told us that he wanted to introduce us to a longtime friend of his, a Buddhist nun, who had taken a vow of staying in an enclosed room for 15 years, meditating and not eating anything other than what people would bring and hand to her through an open window. The nun had recently finished her retreat and was now ready to receive her many visitors. At that point, the temples and funeral processions had already confirmed the prejudice in our minds that these Chinese religions are indeed strange and difficult to understand. Now, hearing about the nun, we wondered even more why a religion would ask such a harsh and difficult thing from anyone. 15 years locked up in a room? Why? What for? So as we reached the top of the hill, sharing such thoughts, the nun appeared to welcome us with the most radiant smile I had ever seen on anyone. "You are Christians?" she asked. When we said yes, her smile grew even wider, and she answered, "Makes no difference whatsoever. Christians or Buddhists, we are all brothers and sisters." It was just as if she had read our mind. I think she did. I was so impressed about her attitude, and then so painfully aware of my own prejudice and ignorance that I decided right there and then to learn more about Buddhism, to find out where this kind of open and embracing attitude came from. So at this point, I want you to remember two attitudes that had such a transformative effect on me and my whole life trajectory: hospitality and the notion of kinship. We are all brothers and sisters. It makes no difference at all. Kinship, not kingship, kinship. Are these not essential Christian values? Are we not enjoined to welcome the stranger, to show hospitality, to see the face of God, of Jesus in every person? I returned to Taiwan in the following year and enrolled in the Chinese language school at the university in Taipei. A few months later, a student from my dorm asked me if I wanted to visit a Buddhist hermit monk living by a lake near the east coast of Taiwan. So this visit was the first encounter with my teacher, Master Xindao, who is now the abbot of the Wushan Monastery on Lingjiu Mountain, which houses more than 100 nuns and monks on the east coast of Taiwan. He's also the founder of the Museum of World Religions in Taipei and of the planned University of Life and Peace in Yangon, Myanmar. That university is set up or being set up to address the ecological crisis from both a practical, scientific, and spiritual perspective. And right now we have our winter school with the university. Usually I would be in Myanmar by now, but it's not possible. So it's all via Zoom. We have 8 students. And the topic is an it's an interdisciplinary topic on decision making. How do we make decisions in the financial world, in the economic world, in companies, actually with sight of how to address our ecological crisis? So what's involved in decision making, also on the psychological level? How many factors do come into a good, also spiritual level? How do we make wholesome, healthy decisions for ourselves and for the earth? But to come back to my story with Master Xindao. When I first met him in early 1980, he lived in a tiny village, in a tiny hermitage all by himself, with only one assistant and another disciple who was there occasionally. And by that time, he had also spent already many years meditating in graveyards. So this kind of meditation is a Buddhist practice really to help us become more aware of death and impermanence. Why? In fact, it is to treasure our short and precious life to the fullest, rather than wasting it, and to prepare ourselves spiritually for where all of us are going to end up one day, which is actually, yes, in a graveyard. So having grown up Catholic, I found it difficult to answer many of Shifu's, that's how we called our master, or call our master Shifu, which also means teacher. I found it difficult to answer his questions to me about God, or who I'm truly am myself, or what life is all about. See, had just turned 19 years old. And trying to understand better what he was telling me about the empty, infinite nature of all that exists, including myself. Empty, infinite? Or about interconnectedness, impermanence, wisdom, and compassion. I started reading one book after another on Buddhism to check out on what he was saying. And when I returned to Germany after 2 years of study in Taiwan, I enrolled in Chinese studies and philosophy at Munich University because I felt that I needed to study the Western philosophical and spiritual tradition together with the Eastern one, to come to a more mature understanding of my own spiritual background and tradition. But also mindful of what Shifu had told me, namely that I would not really understand what Buddhism is about if I didn't start practicing meditation. I participated in my first 7-day Zen retreat that was held in a Franciscan monastery by a German Jesuit priest, Father Inomia Lassalle, who was a missionary in Japan. Having undergone very intense Zen training in Japanese Buddhist temples himself, he discovered the potential, the spiritual potential in Zen for Christians, namely the centeredness, the clarity, and insight that arise from sitting in stillness, from stilling our body and mind. And he was teaching that in courses in monasteries all over Europe. So like Father Wang in Taiwan, who always encouraged me to visit Shifu, saying, as Christians, we have so much to learn from the Buddhists. I was also encouraged by Father Lassalle when I asked him, Jesus wouldn't mind if I practiced Eastern meditation? I was worried about that. And he said, you know what? I wouldn't worry about this. And so I trusted him with that. So what did I learn from my experiences so far? First, I felt that meeting the Buddhist nun and then Shifu, the hermit monk, was not something that I could have possibly thought of or arranged by myself. So I felt that this was an opportunity given to me by divine providence. And the question was whether I would make use of that opportunity or not. You know, going to Taiwan on my own at age 18 And then meeting a culture and religious traditions so different from my own required an act of courage on my part, but also an act of trusting the divine guidance or the calling. So in this, the support of Father Wang, the Catholic priest who was a religious authority for me, of course, also a father figure and a friend figure. Anyway, that support had been crucial for me, just as the assurance of Father Lassalle that I will not give up or lose my roots of faith by practicing meditation. On the contrary, he told me, by doing so, I would water those roots and deepen my faith. And I have found this to be very true. Just let me give you an example for this. So after finishing my master's degree at Munich University, I was awarded a scholarship to research and write my PhD thesis on Chinese Buddhism at the University of Kyoto in Japan. So that gave me the opportunity to attend Zen retreats in Japan itself. And one question I had asked myself honestly for some time now was the following. I know theoretically that God is love, since this is what the Bible tells us and our teachers. But can I really say that I understand this, that I have experienced this? With all the suffering and the destruction we see in the world all around us, can we really confidently say or understand that God is love? So during one silent retreat in the mountains near Tokyo, the answer to this question just gently presented itself to me. It was an experience of being intimately held in love, and in clearly seeing the light of that love shining in all of the other retreat participants and the universe all around us. It was an experience that really made me laugh and cry with joy. And so even though it never repeated itself in quite the same way, I have never again doubted love as the core of our own being and the core of the universe. So, trusting in providence, following the calling, having courage, and opening up to divine love, seeing that divine love in each and every one. These are important steps, not only in an intercultural, interfaith context, but in the life of each and every one of us. And strangely enough, once we leave behind our comfort zone and dare to open up to what's not yet familiar, we eventually come to see the divine image in every person and the divine presence in the beauty of the universe, in the eyes of the children, the light playing in the leaves outside, a starry night, a beautiful sunrise, the singing of a bird. We experience all of this more deeply because we have become more open to the mystery of it all, more attentive to the beauty of everyday life. So after finishing my PhD and following Ruben from Japan to Dallas, we got married and then we had 2 boys. When the children were about 5 and 6 years old, we stayed in Kyoto for 2 years, from 1998 to 2000. And that was the opportunity for me to fly the short distance again to Taiwan, reconnect with Shifu in person, and become an advisor for the building of the Museum of World Religions, which opened in 2001 after a 10-year preparatory phase. It opened in Taipei. The content of the museum was developed by Professor Lawrence Sullivan and his research team from the Center for the Study of World Religions from Harvard University. And the design was by the New York-based Ralph Applebaum firm, which also designed the Holocaust Museum in Washington and many other projects. I would be happy to give you a slide tour through the museum at some other occasion, but there is no time, unfortunately, for that now. The museum is based on Shifu's vision to further respect, understanding, love, and cooperation between religions, and serves as a platform for interfaith education and dialogue in Taiwan and abroad. So please check out the website, MWR, Museum of World Religions, mwr.org.tw, mwr.org.tw, and you will also have a beautiful tour through the museum on that website. Let me just open a window. It's getting, close the window. It's getting a bit noisy outside. Construction work, sorry. The museum opened 2 months after 9/11, and thus our immediate task was to reach out to Muslims in the US and start a dialogue. Our first Buddhist-Muslim dialogue was held at Columbia University, and so far we have held 16 dialogues throughout the world. And the goal of these dialogues is to get to know each other, to transform conflicts, to become friends, and to cooperate on so many causes like now the environment, the protection of our ecology. The dialogues have different themes. For the dialogues in Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, that was in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, we spoke about building a new Asia. And at the UNESCO in Paris, we addressed global ethics and good governance. And at Beijing University, we spoke about religious teachings, what religions say on life and death. The students didn't want to go home during that dialogue. You see, in Beijing, it was not yet so common at the university to talk about religious topics, and people were just utterly fascinated and grateful and happy. In the end, in the evening, the police officers that were guarding the whole event had to tell the students, it's late now, we continue tomorrow, you come back tomorrow. It was so amazing. Our most recent youth dialogue at the UN in New York was on the topic of how to lead a meaningful spiritual life, how to take care of ourselves, of others, and the environment. And interestingly, just to make this comment, many of the young people said that they would like to see more role models in their own lives that could guide their spiritual path. And I found that for me quite interesting, especially to hear that from many also of the Muslim young people. So I already said something about the dialogues, but people in general always will ask me, so what's really the meaning and the outcome of these kinds of dialogues that you have been conducting for so many years in different parts of the world? So the meaning is always to build connections of friendship between communities and people, of course. Let me give you the example of a dialogue that we held in Ladakh, the north of India, in 2010. So beginning in the late 80s, in the late 1980s, there had been some tensions between the communities for political and economic reasons, also religious reasons. But through the dialogue that we organized with the help of the Venerable Sangasena, who is the founder of the Mahabodhi International Meditation Center in Ladakh, through his intercession, the Buddhist leaders were welcomed at the mosque for the first time. And the Muslim leaders also joined our conference, which was held at the Mahabodhi community, which is also, it's a center that houses nuns and monks, but it also has a school from first grade to all the way through high school, where deserving students and also nuns and monks study up to high school graduation. And during our conference, not only did the people come and join the meeting, but also Muslim villagers wanted to join and show their hospitality. And so they actually visited us to come to their houses and gardens. And we were treated with much hospitality and also offered a meal. It was very touching. So one important aspect of the dialogues is this: we always invite religious leaders, of course, and scholars to the meeting. And we also emphasize the participation of youth. That is very important, The young people who see and experience dialogue and cooperation between the leaders of the different religions and communities, they will also be inspired themselves to find friends from the other tradition and to work towards understanding and peace. So the goal of our Buddhist-Muslim dialogues is of all interfaith dialogue is really to sow the seeds of peace. So when the Mahabodhi Center, that same center, held a different conference a few years later, and even though it was not at all on a Buddhist-Muslim topic, the Muslim villagers who heard about it again wanted to welcome all of the conference guests in their house and gardens. So in other words, I was so happy to experience that. I was invited again. And just to see that these deep ties of friendship in the community have continued ever since this first Buddhist-Muslim dialogue I helped to organize there in 2010. So from early on, we also participated in the meetings held by the Chicago Parliament of World Religions. They had their first meeting in 1898 already, and then they continued later, starting from the 1960s again. And I also became a board member of the Elijah Interfaith Institute. There's unfortunately not time or no time to go into the details more closely here, but I hope that you could also check out their websites if you are interested. So the Elijah Interfaith Institute and the Parliament of World Religions. But let me only mention that, among other topics, the Elijah Interfaith Institute has focused on a series entitled Friendship Across Religions, in which the world's most prominent religious leaders call on everyone to make friends across religions. You can find that series yourself on YouTube under the title Elijah, Make Friends. Please check that out. It is through that biannual meeting of the biannual meetings of the Elijah Institute that I have become close friends with many religious leaders from the different traditions. And among them is also retired Bishop Frank Griswold of the Episcopalian Church, who really continues to be such a deep inspiration to me. So I really think that making friends is the deepest lesson and the greatest gift that we receive from interfaith and intercultural dialogue. If we look at the deep divisions and wounds that exist in the world today and in our society, something that all of us also very painfully became aware of with the storming of our capital on January 6th, then we really understand the challenge and the importance of making friends across traditions, across boundaries. This also includes making friends with the earth, of course, realizing that we are one deeply interconnected community of life, whose well-being depends on the well-being of all of its members, and of course the well-being of the earth that sustains all of us. So making friends starts not so much from speaking and doing, but from listening. This is perhaps the most important lesson. Had I not deeply listened to what the Buddhist nun told us in the beginning in Taiwan, we are all sisters and brothers without any difference, Buddhists and Christians, my life trajectory might have been very different. And I might not even be here today to have the occasion to give you my little talk today. But when we see the other as not different from ourselves, then we share their joys and their pain. And we want for them what we want for ourselves. That's obvious. So let me, or allow me to end this talk with a few words on friendship from the religious leaders in our series. And as I said before, please feel free to listen to other beautiful statements, for example, including those of the Pope or of His Holiness the Dalai Lama on YouTube. So Sri Sri Vavi Shankar, an Indian spiritual leader, advises us as follows. Honor other religions like you do your own. Honor other religions like you do your own. Honestly, can we do that? Under the primate of the Swedish Church, Archbishop Ante Jackelin says, interfaith friendship starts a process where prejudices go away and new insights are born, where hope is born. And that is very important, where hope is born. When our son was 16 years old, I had the great occasion to bring him to one of our interfaith meetings in India with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many of the other religious leaders. And he said in the end, I had no idea that all these leaders get along so well with each other, that they listen to each other and speak with each other, that they are friends, and that they would even speak to and care about someone like me. So that's where hope is born. In each of your actions to reach out to some other human being from another tradition or even from our own tradition, this is where hope is born. So, and my final quote is by Lord Jonathan Sacks, who is the former Chief Rabbi of England, who unfortunately, very sadly, passed away in November of last year and is so dearly missed. During an Elijah Interfaith conference a few years ago that was held in England, Lord Jonathan Sacks even received us for a meal in his own home in London. Such hospitality. If you are not yet familiar with him, you might want to check out some of his books, which I promise you will leave you very much enriched, like they left me as well. But here is what he says. One of the wonderful things about spending time with people completely unlike you is to discover how much you actually have in common. The same fears, the same hopes, the same concerns. So I am finishing my talk here, but I wish for you that you may be blessed in life with encounters of people who are completely unlike you, and that you discover that gift of friendship across religions and cultures. If you wonder how to start here in Dallas, check out Thanksgiving Square, or also check out Faith Commons, our website, and see the many wonderful interfaith dialogues on topics that are of great concern to us as citizens of Dallas and of Texas. And again, you will come away so much enriched. But I will stop now and deeply thank you for listening and for being here today. Thank you again.